I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. On this video, we're back on this 69 Charger. As you can see, we're doing quarter skins on this car. I gotta say, I 100% disagree with putting these quarter skins on this 69 Charger. On this video, we're gonna do the job. We're gonna do it the best of our ability and try and make it the best quarter skin job we can. But I'm gonna show you why I think that this car is a perfect candidate and why we need full quarter panels. I'm gonna do a side-by-side comparison, and I'm gonna give you some hours and time with this job with the quarter skin and why it's actually a misconception. Most people to hear quarter skins and they think the job's gonna be easier, when all in actuality, on a car like this, a full quarter panel would be a nicer job. It would be structurally sound more and actually save time and money in the long run. So where we're at, if you saw on this video, this car, basically, it came from about 500-600 miles away. It's pretty far. The good thing about YouTube and the bad thing about YouTube is how I used to operate is I did, flipper cars starting out. I did my own stuff. I did friends and family's cars and then local cars around the North Carolina area. Since the YouTube channel, this thing has blown up. I have people from all around the US and actually in other countries contacting me about doing some cars, and we have a couple in the works. That's really great, and thank you for everyone that has supported us on that. The problem with that though is a lot of times I can't meet the owners. Communication, if I'm doing a local car, I call someone over and I say, hey man, come look at this thing, or bring the car over beforehand and we look at it together and we see what we're jumping into. A lot of these cars, like this one in particular, since it came from so far away, I'm kind of at the owner's mercy of his description on how bad the car is. I don't do estimates, and this is a perfect reason why. You'll see in the future. Basically, there's no reason for the owner to lie to me, because if the car comes here, we're not going to turn anything away if the owner wants to invest in it. But for instance, this owner on this car said, oh yeah, it just needs a couple floor patches, trunk pan, and the rest of the car is pretty solid. If you look when this car first showed up at our shop on the first video, if you go back, I said the 69 Charger arrived, and man, it was way worse than we initially thought. It's not a problem. The only thing is that some of the stuff wasn't conveyed properly. The owner told me, and I figured this with all the rot we had down here and up here, that we were doing full quarters on the car. The car arrived with quarter skins. And the problem I have, I feel that these quarter skins are a subpar repair. I'm going to show you why. First of all, I think they're going to be a lot more work. We already have the whole car stripped down. To really do full quarters on the car, we really just have to remove the lead channel here, drill out some spot welds down the window channel and the trunk gutters, remove the tail panel, which is mostly off, and that's about it. We can just put on a full quarter, and all we're going to end up doing is welding in these couple seams, there and down there. Now, you might say, well, the quarter skins, there's nothing wrong with up here. But on this car, if you look, we actually did a bunch of repairs up here in this window channel. Both sides were rusted out. We had to basically cut out the holes. It was completely rotted on the inner structure, and we basically had to make custom pieces, put everything together, weld up, grind, and clean down. All in all, they came out pretty good. You could also see on this deck filler panel, what we had to do on the deck filler panel, it was actually warped and it was stretched, and it wasn't just from our welding, the car came that way. So we had to heat shrink and really work this panel down. It looks good now, but we're talking between that and then the quarter panels. With the quarter panels themselves, this is a Goodmark brand. I'm not happy with this Goodmark brand. How these quarter skins, I could describe them, these are quarter skins that would be used almost as a patch skin. You buy it and you put a little patch here, you put a little patch there, you take a section off here. What these quarter skins are meant for, I believe, if you're going to do something like this, you flange it out and you basically put the quarter panel on top of the car. They're thinner metal. I'll show you right now. We'll take the dial caliper, and basically you could see I measured this Charger the factory skin right here, and if you look at it, the factory charger skin was 49 thousandths. So that's with the dial caliper gauge. Then looking at this quarter skin, when I measured it, it was 34,000, 30,000. It kind of went back and forth. If we go over here and look at this Challenger right here, I did this Challenger. This is a car that we did a couple weeks ago. Everything on this car front to back is AMD metal. So this is what I recommend most things. Dynacorn is good brand. I'm sorry, the door is Dynacorn right here. But even so, if we put a dial caliper on this Challenger and we're talking front to back, you can see right now putting the dial caliper on that this is actually 48 thousandths. So the AMD panel, when they say they're Mopar authentic, they're actually really close. I mean, it's a lot easier to weld a 48 thousandths panel than working on a 30 thousandths versus a 49 thousandths sheet metal. You're just having inconsistency because you basically have to work on the hotter part and then work down. The two metals are going to react different to get good fusion. Saying that, also, this rear corner, if you look, we have a lot of work in this rear corner right here. The panel, if you can see, it come out straight and there was a giant gap here. Again, this is a sign of just a patch panel. It's not really made as a replacement panel. So again, down here on this corner too, you could see what we started with on these corner pieces. We really had to work them, weld them. They weren't even close. So we're making our time up here. All in all, besides that too, with the quarter panels being so thin, it's actually the quarter panel on these cars is the structural integrity of this car. So there's no roll cage in here, there's no subframe connectors. This unibody is what holds the car together. So it doesn't sound like that much. That 15, 20 thousandths, that's a lot in the structural integrity of the car trying to go back and forth. So all in all, that's where we're at. Let's go to the job on the quarter skins. I'm going to show you where we got to this point and how we got, what we did and what our plan is on these quarter skins.
This is how the quarter skins arrived at our shop. You could see they had a little bit of the top section on them, and what I decided to do was go ahead and we're going to cut the top off. The bend on the charger in the top area was in good shape, and this skin, again, being so thin, I didn't have to want to worry about the top trying to pull down and sag on the car. So we basically cut right under that top line to get the quarter skin as high as we can. Now we are going to trim it back a little bit more, but we're trying to keep most of the skin as much as we can where we can go back and we don't have to cut too much, and we try to stay as close to the top bend as possible. Now we do not want to weld on the bend because again, we won't get that very crisp clean line, so we're trying to go right under it. What I'm doing right now, I pretty much had the skin on the car as you saw test fitted, and now we're running tape on the inside. I put calico coals in the car with the clamps holding them in, you could see, and my tape line is running right under those holes. Now what I'm going to do here now, we're going to go ahead and we're going to basically leave those holes in place. I'm marking the line with paint just so I can see exactly a crisp clean line that's really bright for me to see. Sometimes the markers aren't exactly perfect, and I really want this perfect being that we're TIG welding. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going over and I'm going to trim over around those holes. We're actually going to keep those holes and those tabs on the quarter skin. That's the part of metal that's going to hold it up for us. So there's many ways you can do this. I've done those clamps, you know, with the little it's like a screw clamp and it's got the T on the back of it. Those work really well, but see, then the gap's going to be a little bit bigger. I really like those for MIG welding and everything else, but with this, we're actually going to use the quarter skin itself to hold on the panel, and you can see I'm cutting in between those tabs that we just sectioned off. For doing a quarter skin like this, I really think this is the best method to hang it, especially if we're TIG welding. You can use those clamps, but when you lift up one side, the other side is going to try to go down. We really want a tight edge, and so we already test fit all the calico holes, and so we know everything should just go right back on, and we're basically just cutting our line. That's going to give us a very tight fit, and you'll see as we go through and we start tacking this thing how we're going to remove it in the future. we're just going through with 80 grit on a surface prep disc just to clean up the sharp edges and deburr the edge from the cutoff wheel. You know, a lot of times when you do that, and a lot of times, you know, you won't cut exactly straight because we're going one direction or other. So this kind of just rounds everything off. Now, if you remember, this was set overlapping on the car, so nothing yet is actually set in place. So you can trim this back and make your adjustments and not worry about it. We're about to set it on the car in a little bit. Now, back to the car. This is the area that the quarter skin was overlapping. Before we go any further, we have to strip this car. There's a couple reasons. One, we want to make sure we're not welding over rust. Two, we know that we're going to be welding on this quarter panel, and there's a good chance we're going to have to metal work this area. So what we're going to have to do is we need to get it down to bare metal to really properly metal work it. You know, especially if we're using a shrinking disc, it doesn't work over paint. So anytime I'm working on an area of a car, I personally like to just strip it down to bare metal. And then you don't want to be welding stuff and then, you know, you have dents and now you're fighting a warped car underneath. And you could see once we start stripping this car, I'll show you in a second, around the gas cap hole, and there was a spot on the other side. When we start stripping it, we did find Bondo, we did find filler. So it's also really hard when you make these decisions on quarter panels. Be prepared that you don't even know what you're going to find under this car. So I usually like to play on the safe side and just go ahead and do the quarter panels. You could see right here, this was an area I found that had a bunch of filler on it. So we decided to hammer and dolly that back out. We got the curvature coming up around the gas cap. I told you there was a lot of rust holes there, so we basically just cut it out. We MIG welded a little patch in there. It was just easy on that section, just throw it in there, and it saved a little bit of time. Here's a close-up on the clamps and what they look like on the car.
So what we're looking at between, you saw with the gas tank, with the dent sitting up here, the repatches on the deck filler panel and the upper quarter panels, what we're looking at is about 13 hours of work so far. I did say to the owner everything that we're talking about, and I estimated that this was going to cost a lot more. He did have these panels, and I asked him why we were going this route, and I couldn't get a clear answer. So at this point, we're just gonna, you know, just do what we're gonna do. I will say that, you know, certain shops do something different. Maybe he heard from another shop that they would do it this way, and that might be their process. My opinion on that is, you know, if you have a shop that specializes doing something a certain way, we mostly do full quarter panel jobs. That's what we do around here. I don't do a lot of custom fabrication, small panels. Just we're set up with the equipment, with the frame jig, everything to be efficient in big panels. I think if you buy a full panel, it's going to save you on the long run, and that's the kind of work we're trying to put out. So if you don't like the way a shop works, go find a shop that will do the work and shows you the quality that they want to do. Also, don't take this video, please, and show it to a shop and say, I want it done this way. If that shop doesn't TIG weld, if they don't have a spot welder, if they don't do things like I do, it might be a failing thing. So take that for what it is. Just let the shop help you out. There are some shops that will basically take people's money and run and kind of screw them over. But there are a lot of good car shops out there and do care. And honestly, through this whole process, I get amped up on this because I don't want to see the owner waste their money. I want this car personally to be the best looking 1969 Charger that, you know, anyone's ever seen. And then when they go to the shop somewhere else and they say, well, hey, who did that whole quarter skin job? And the owner tells them, and he says, oh, how much do you pay? It costs this much. And that shop says, what? I could have done a full quarter panel for that job. Well, they might not know the whole story, because I also could have done a whole quarter panel job, and it would turn out better, and it would probably be cheaper in the long run. Yes, you would have to buy the deck filler panel and the new quarter panel, but like I said, these skin patches, there's a reason why they're so cheap. It's not just like, you know, we went over the reason. So spend the extra money, go with the quality parts. Even if we were doing patch panels on this car at this shop, and what I like to do, I like to get full quarter panels. We're going to spend the money, we're going to get that authentic, same gauge thickness as factory OEM cars. It's just going to make the product look better. And honestly, I'd rather build nice cars than anything else. So let's get to this job. We got the quarter skins on. I already told you we're gonna do it. We're gonna do the best job we can. As you could see, we did actually have these quarter panels test fit on the car when we did the inner structure. You could see a picture, if you go back to the last video, of these quarter panels sitting on the car up high. You saw what we did to get them to this point since then. I have them clamped in place, and what I did make sure, we made sure our body lines are lined up perfect. We can look down this whole car, looking at our doors are lined up where the top is, we're gapped on the bottom, and we're looking good against the front rocker. We're also lined up down here in this body line, so that's a good thing. Also with these chargers, the B-bodies, what you need to realize, and I think it will come naturally, but you need to make sure this quarter panel also bows out. I don't know if you could see it on the camera, but this car is just such a beautiful car. You don't realize it till you really look at it and see the curvatures on these chargers and really the cornets, all the B-body cars of this generation. So it's really cool. So focus, make sure you're getting the factory curvature out. And then what I did, if we got our Coleco clamps, we got them taped up. We're gonna take some etching primer. It's fast drying etching primer, and we're gonna prime over this, and this is gonna be where we're gonna cut, and we'll take it to the next step. So, and you'll see why I'm using etching primer. We also strip this whole car up here. The reason being, because we might have to heat shrink and metal work it, and I don't want to heat shrink over any kind of paint. It just, we're gonna have to strip it down anyway. So we tried to make sure we didn't do any damage, and we found damage up here, you saw, as we were stripping the paint. We just don't want to fight that, because we weld it, now we're stuck. So let's prime this area up. Just put a little bit on there. Like I said, I got the clamps taped up. We'll try not to paint the tips of them. And that's going to be our line. I feel like this is the best way to mark it. You know, you can use a scribe. There's again, this isn't the only way to do it, but this is the way I like to do it. So just a little bit of paint, we'll do that, and we'll go do the other side then. And what I'm also gonna have to do, looking at, if you see these panels, the whole inside of them came, these panels are about 5 years old. I think the owner had them for 5, 6 years, he said. So there was actually rust built up on the inside, and it has a couple dents and dings and waves from shipping. So we're gonna pull these panels off. We're gonna just straighten them out even closer. The owner wants them to be epoxied. We're gonna epoxy the inside of the panels. We're gonna go all up under our repairs and up top on the deck filler panel where we know our metal work's done. So stay tuned, we're gonna let this dry. We're gonna epoxy these panels, and we'll come back and I'll show you the next step on this quarter panel install.
Turning our attention onto the other side of the car real quick, we're just again going to tape up the clamps. We're going to go ahead and open the door, check all the body gaps, the body lines, make sure it's good, and we're going to put the etching primer on the quarter panel. Don't spray this very heavy. You don't want it to run. Just a little bit of light coats goes a long way. Another thing on this quarter panel, you could see the lip coming down on the end. It was just cut too short. You know, I didn't bend this. This is how it came. So we had to go ahead and we're going to make some cardboard templates and extend the brackets on the back. I got my son helping me. Everything's dry right now. So we're going to go ahead and pull the quarter panels off as we start prepping them. First, we got to get the tape off so we didn't paint our clamps basically. And then we'll just go through and grab the wrench and start pulling them off. I will say these quarter panels on a car like this, especially as flimsy as they are and as thin gauge metal, this was a two-person operation to move them. You couldn't lift this quarter panel by yourself. It wanted to fold in half. These were just really weak and really flimsy. So I also have clamps you see holding the whole thing in place. I really want to make sure that our line was set up right and everything was fit up where we wanted to. We didn't want to, you know, have to weld and come to find that the back or front was too high or too low. So make sure you do all that and get everything lined up before you go ahead and start marking your top line on a quarter skin. We're going to go now. You could see exactly why we use our paint line. It's so bright against the bare metal, and I can sit there. What I'm doing, I'm using the cutoff wheel. I'm actually cutting lower, and what I decided to do, I come back and I basically start running the cutoff wheel back over after I cut it low as almost a grinder slightly. So I'm just easing up on the line, and what I did, I'm cutting just a little bit of the red because we actually don't want it to sit over each other at all. We want them pretty much perfectly butt up against it. And you'll see when we put the quarter panel on, there's gonna be a couple spots that we just had to go back through and just barely grind. Now you don't want your gap too big on TIG welding. If you're MIG welding though, you really want the gap the size of that cutoff wheel. That's why a lot of times if you're MIG welding, I've seen people just run the cutoff wheel right down from one panel to the other on the same time, and I've done it too myself, and then that gives you a good gap, because the MIG welder really, it needs that that extra open space because it's trying to fire off that MIG wire. So that's how you get your penetration. If you do that, the MIG wire is just kind of heating up on top. You're not burning in the trigger long enough to get the penetration. So TIG welding, you're running a puddle and you're basically fusing the metal together and using the filler as an additive. That's a big difference on why gaps a necessity in MIG welding, but TIG welding, it actually hurts you a lot more. You see, going back to actually the video right now, we're stripping down the inside of these quarter panels to bare metal just like the owner wanted. I use the Eastwood SCT. It really removes this E-coat really easy and doesn't hurt the panel. It does leave the surface a little too smooth, so you have to basically go back through with a 120 grit on a DA so the epoxy will stick. Before I lay down the epoxy, we're going to go ahead and spray the weld through primer. This is going to be on an area anywhere we're going to MIG weld or use a Resistance Pro Spot welder. You can see I lay a heavy coat, and then I'll go ahead and tape off the areas where I want the primer to be kept. So after we lay this epoxy coat and epoxy is in the drying phase, I just pull it off and we get a really crisp line just on the areas that we want to weld. So really when the final product's said and done, we have a hard edge and you really don't see the weld through primer.
So you see, we got our quarter panels pretty much straightened out, prepped up. We put them in the epoxy. You saw we taped up where we're gonna put our weld through primers. There's certain areas you see that you would have rosette holes, like up in this area, up in the front door jamb over here. My spot welder won't reach, so we had to poke holes in there. But you see, same thing down here. This is 3 panels, so I decided to do a MIG weld down there. And then around here, we're gonna use our spot welders. But you see, when we tape it off, it looks a lot cleaner. I also left this top area where we're going to be welding bare metal. I don't want any impurities or anything coming from the backside. We'll just have to go back through and spray from the inside when this project's over to protect it. Back here, we didn't talk about it. You see, we did a lot of work in the corner pieces. I did extend this piece you saw that was the welded. I'm gonna leave it like that and we'll clean it up and we'll get the spot welder in there. This corner piece is the hardest thing I feel on the whole back of these 68 to 70 Chargers. Basically what we ended up doing, I'll show you on the car, we basically got it screwed in with the tail panel test fit. This is before we do the inner structure. And then we come back through, I tacked the outside of this bracket. You'll see, I'll show you while we're putting this on, I'll show you where we tacked it. And with it tacked, once we pull this apart, I come back through and weld it together. You know, put the spot welder on there and make sure, so now this bracket has become part of the quarter skin. So that's how we prepped our quarter skins. We're moving on to the car and get that prepped up. You saw, we put the red etching primer. We still have some on the outside of the quarter panel. I'll show you why we use the red etching primer. Basically some lacquer thinner. You throw it on there and this stuff will wipe right off. So even this is a day later with it being dried. If you get to it right away, it comes off even better. But to me, it's just as easy to do this. It won't hurt the epoxy. You can wipe it off there. I mean, no problem there. So this etching primer will just come off. And then what we'll end up doing, I'll come back, I'll clean that up. I'll come back with another rag. Once we're done with that and we get this area really clean, the best we can, we're gonna, to prep it for welding, we're gonna sit there and I'm just gonna scuff it with a red Scotch-Brite. So we'll just go back through, get our metal area deburred and really cleaned up. And then right before we weld, we'll take some acetone. So we'll get to this, we're gonna prep this area, we'll put the quarter panels on, and we'll come back through and I'll show you how to do the tail panel.
So these quarter skins have been on and off this car about 10 to 15 times, give or take, depending on the side. This is the final fit up. So this is the one we're going to spend the most time. I'm going to make sure the door gaps are perfectly aligned. I'm going to make sure our top edge is perfectly in line where we're going to weld, and our TIG spacing is really good, making sure our corner pieces on the back of the car, everything's lined up, the wheel arches. This is the one time to really spend the extra time and make sure it's how you want it. Now, saying that, I fit it up real quick and then we loosen the bottom. The reason I did this is we're going through an attacking phase and I didn't want anything fighting the panel. So leaving it loose almost lets the panel just naturally sit in place. Again, our clamps up top are holding them. So we don't have to worry about anything having to move. And then what I decided to do, this is such a long run, I started in the middle of the panel. And I worked my way, you saw it in a second, in the front. Then we're putting a tack every inch or so with the TIG welder. My wife was helping me because with the TIG welder, it's really hard to get that fusion tack. Right there with the grinder, you could see there was one spot that was kind of sitting on top of the panel more than the other. So she's basically getting the panels lined up with a screwdriver. She's pushing down with the red handle scraper tool, and basically as she gets them lined, I'm tacking them. What we do, we work our way to the edge where there's a little piece with our clamp. We pull the clamp off, and then our overhang piece, you see I just cut off and I'm just basically grinding it down flush, and then we continue the process. This is allowing the tacks to hold the panel and our clamps in front of it to also hold the panel, so you're not fighting anything. When I use those clamps I told you about earlier, you know which one I'm talking about, with the little screw through them, it seems like they hold it, but you can wiggle them and stuff wants to move. When you're welding too, these panels want to move, so you have to keep checking it. There was one area right here, as I'm going back and double checking everything, we were just a hair on the inside, so I just cut off the tacks, readjusted it, and then we're good to go. You just want this area to be perfect, and you need a hammer and dolly when it's done.
All right, so we got the quarter panels on both sides all tack welded into place, and we're happy with it. You can see the whole bottom of the quarter is loose. What I ended up doing, I'd rather tack the top so we weren't binding it or fighting it. So what we're gonna do, I showed you how we put the corner brackets on the quarter panels itself. So now we're gonna put the corner brackets onto the rear cross member. So I made some marks earlier. These are all test fit, but this is how I went about doing it. So quarter brackets, they are already welded on the quarters. We put tacks on the outside after we got everything aligned where we wanted it. Those were the tacks I was showing you earlier. But what we ended up doing, you want to screw them so you got to get them into the cross member. And I'll show you, we're going to test fit the rear valance tail panel, lower tail panel. I believe it's the rear valance because this would be the tail panel. And like I said, these should be close. We've had this test fit already. This is just a final, make sure nothing's messed up. And this is one of those things, just keep trying and keep adjusting it till you get it right. All right, so those are in place. So now we take our rear valance and it slides behind the tail panel in front of the quarter panels. And what we're focused on right now, we're focused on more than anything else, these corner brackets and how they align right here. Now there's gonna be some seam sealant in there, that's how the factory had them, but you really wanna make sure they're close. This panel, when we first started, was way off. So we'll put a clamp on the bottom, and you can see that's gonna hold it in there. And then we come over to this side, and you see it's looking pretty good here too. So, and like I said, this didn't happen like this initially. This took a lot of trial error, but you want a smooth curve coming around the corner towards the back of this car. You can see we did work this corner down, and we still have to work it some more. It this panel, the stamping's just not very sharp. So the next thing what we're looking at, we gotta get the adjustment for this rear corner piece. And actually, I already know we should be pretty close. I'm gonna go ahead and run the screw in here. So what we're looking at on this side, and this is gonna set the quarter panel in and out to the rear cap. You can see this curvature is important. So here's the end cap for a charger. What we're looking at, it's going to be hard to tell if we're close or not with the pin sticking out. So I basically made a cardboard template of it. We cut it, it's perfect on the cardboard template. We labeled the cardboard template, and what we're going to end up doing, we'll just put the cardboard template up to it. And you can see that's how we get our quarter panel alignment. We're good on the top, we're good on the sides, and that's where it'll curve in. Then, when we're all said and done, we'll put marks where we got to drill our holes, and this will be one of the last things we install. So we're going to do the other side. This tail panel is looking good. We're going to go through now, and we're going to pull in this quarter panel all down the whole sides, front to rear, and we'll get everything clamped in solid. Then you're going to see, we're going to go ahead and pull this tail panel out, prep the tail panel, and then we're going to start welding up we're going to TIG weld the top of the quarter panel first, and then we'll go around the quarter panel and finish the quarter panel install, and then wrap it up with this.
So here's an arc shot of the real-time speed of TIG welding. You can see we strike up. This is a real slow process. We get the puddle going, and once the puddle's going, I'm basically letting the filler rod as needed. I'm trying not to add more than I need. That when I think it's going to blow through, we're just adding the filler rod and it'll suck right in there. We decided to speed up the process just so you can see what's under the hood. And this is a real close-up. This is about what it looks like in my mask. Actually, it might be even a little bit bigger zoomed in than what I actually see. But this is a real delicate process. It takes a long time, but on the outside of panels, I really think that TIG welding is the way to go. You could see the weld, the heat affected zone is very consistent. I'm working the pedal a lot, but see, you have to back out of the pedal the longer the run goes because the more heat goes in the panel. So with the foot pedal, you have complete control of that. When I was tack welding, I was just using a trigger button, but now this is a foot pedal controlled area. Looking at a different view on the weld, you could see really, as sped up as this is, how tedious this process is. This weld from the end cap of the tail panel to the door seam on each side took me 45 minutes each. What you're trying to do, you're really trying to control the heat. Heat's based on two things. It's basically your amperage input and your speed. It's the relation of those two. So if you go slower, but you have lower heat input, you would think you actually add more heat in the panel because the heat will absorb it. But if you're at a higher amperage, rolling faster, you actually will put less heat in the panel, and it's actually more consistent that way. But you can't go too fast where you need to maintain a good puddle without blowing through. So it's kind of a balance of time versus heat on this, and it really just takes lots of practice. Luckily right here I had 45 minutes on each side practice, but like I said, you could see me adjusting because also I feel in TIG welding, well, really all welding, but especially in TIG welding, you really just have to be comfortable and you have to get in a rhythm, and that just produces good solid welds. I did have to go back through and actually TIG up the holes where our clamps were in place. Now that the TIG welding process on the top of the quarter skins is finished, I'm basically going through the rest of this quarter skin and installing it like I would do a full quarter panel. So you see, I usually MIG weld the doors. Sometimes I get my Pro Spot in there, but these chargers have such a deep like the top of the quarter overhangs, where a lot of cars like GM cars and stuff, it basically you can get the Pro Spot in there with a special arm, but not a big deal. We're just go ahead and you see we MIG weld down, and I'm checking the door profile and the door gap to make sure everything's good. Now this is what I really like to use, the Pro Spot. You could see I can go through this. Each one of these welds takes 20 seconds to 30 seconds max. I just squeeze the trigger, the machine does everything and gives a factory spot welder. When I was telling you earlier that just work off your shop's strengths, or even in your home garage, your strengths and weakness. If I have a spot welder that can save a bunch of time, I don't know why we're not using it to just do most of the welds. Again, we have nothing to prove here. The TIG welder obviously probably takes a lot more skill to use than the Pro Spot, but all in all, the Pro Spot is a better weld as far as corrosion, burning through the paint, and really it gives a stronger weld because you're not overheating the panel or warping anything. I know I said earlier we're going to remove the tail panel before we decide to start TIG welding, but I actually was thinking about more just to make sure nothing moved. I decided to leave the tail panel on and then pull it off after our whole weld's done. You can see as I was kind of messing and prepping with the panel, waiting for it to dry, I'm spot welding the corner pieces onto the cross member, and I started already stripping the E-coat off the outside of the quarter skin. We're going to have to do some hammer and dolly work. I'll get over that. So I just started that process. I'm jumping around a little bit on the car just so there's no downtime. You know, while we're waiting on one thing to go, we'll start on another process. For instance, I got to wait for these welds to cool before I go ahead and sand them. Once those welds do cool down and we sand them down, we come back through with our spot welder. Now, like I said, we try to use this as much as possible, and anywhere it'll reach, we'll go ahead and just hit those spots. Makes it a lot easier. There's certain areas, because I'm not building these cars exactly like the factory and I don't have all the attachments the factories have, that's why we need to bring out the MIG welder a lot of times. But what I'm doing, I'm finalizing these corner brackets, because once the tail panel goes in place, we can't get to these corner outer pieces on the Charger. Now that we've finished welding those corner brackets, we can go ahead and put on the lower valance again. I have stripped it down to bare metal anywhere we're going to weld, and I've applied weld through primer anywhere that we're going to have to be inside to inside welding. I usually leave the outside where I'm going to use a spot welder or MIG welder bare metal if I can. It just gives better contact. You can see on this back panel though, the Pro Spot will go through weld through primer. That's the whole point of it, and that's why we don't use epoxy where we're going to weld, because it won't work there. But you see I have this special attachment, and there is holes in this tail panel going to the rear valance. That's where I had to drill out the original rusted out rear valance. So what I'm basically doing now, I'm going through with the spot welder, I'm adding holes and I'm putting it in place, and then I'm gonna have to go back through with the MIG welder and fill up the old holes. So really this tail panel to rear valance is gonna have probably 3 times more welds than the factory car would have. It's not going to hurt anything. You won't know it. You'll just see a few spot welds, and actually when it's all ground down, you probably won't notice. You can see after I worked on the tail panel piece, I moved my way down to the lower valance to the floor pan. I'm working my way in the center and working my way out. Also, this tail panel is screwed in many places. It shouldn't move anywhere, but this is just a safety if we start in the middle and work our way down. After we do that, you see I'm working my way from the core panels all the way up. Again, I have the holes to fill still, but this Pro Spot, it just makes sure everything squeezes in, and I mean, it's got a ton of clamping force that it pushes everything, and we know we got a good solid piece that joined really well. The final step on the rear valance is going to be these lower corner brackets, and you can see here's a picture on how they're done. I'm basically tucking everything together, and what you want the car, whether you're looking at the side or at the bottom, to just flow around in a nice even curve.
All right, we're done with all the welding on the Charger. Now, I just want to go over some stuff. I know a lot of times, I think there's a misconception, and I'm going to show you right now, kind of be honest with you. The panel looks good. It's welded, it's TIG welded, but honestly, the panel's warped a little bit. And what it is, anything that you weld like that, especially, that's why we kept going as high as we can to this corner to minimize the warpage. What you're going to do, anytime you put heat in a panel, it's going to want to stretch out, and then it's going to want to shrink up as it's cooling. Now, it's a catch-22 because we need to get penetration on the inside, and how we know about that is if you look at the inside of this quarter panel, you could really see the weld on the inside. We're lucky, you know, so we didn't see the front of it, but we're assuming, looking at the back of this weld, and the heat setting was exactly the same, that the penetration's good. We did that. So it's like I said, you got to get it hot enough where it penetrates the panel and it's going to warp. I think the TIG welder is going to be better than the MIG welder, because with the MIG welder, when you're spotting it and you're doing that, the MIG welder shooting more heat in a concentrated area to actually melt the MIG wire and penetrate this at the same time. Also with the MIG wire, now you're getting different heat and cooling cycles, so it's going to want to be even more hilly. And with the MIG welder, you can't hammer it out. We haven't touched this panel yet. This is straight as it's been welded. So I want to show you some stuff. So right now it looks good, but if you look down at it, you can see it is actually warped and wavered. We got some wax and grease remover, and we'll kind of simulate almost like a clear coat. And if you look down at it, you could see the waves. They're going to be right here mostly, but you can see where it's really concentrated. Again, this is really small waves and everything else. What we'll do is we're going to compare it to the Challenger. The Challenger doing the same stuff too. With the AMD panel, you can see it looks better. I mean, it's still, anything is going to need body work. A lot of people don't understand. They think once you get the car out of bare metal, you're done and the new panel's installed, you could just paint it. Well, you're honestly far from paint. So what we're going to do, I'm going to show you too. We did that. That's the visual on it. We're going to take some 320 grit on a long block, and we're going to block it out, and I'm going to show you where the high and low spots are. The reason we're doing this, we're going to have to strip this panel. I'm going to body work it a little bit. I don't want to leave it that way. We're going to get it a little bit closer. It's still never going to be perfect. Well, I think it's a misconception when we watch people on YouTube. They say, oh yeah, welded it, it's good to go, perfect, but you can't really see it even with the eye until you put that clear coat. When it dulls out, like I said, it's drying with a wax and grease remover, you can't really see it. So blocking it out, that's going to show you right there, this is how you would block a car, and we'll go over that in the future, but there's the high and low spots. So we'll do the comparison with the Challenger, and you can see the Challenger is still going to have it with the AMD panel, but it's not going to be as bad, and that's with all the heat we put into this panel. And you see, even down here, we didn't really get to this part of the panel, but this panel's so small and so weak, it's got a lot of imperfections in it. Now also, you can see with the Challenger, us doing the same thing, and what it looks like, it looks a little better. Now this panel, this is where you really see the difference, this gauge metal. Now you're gonna have a body man that's gonna do that, but look at this. If we push in right there, look how weak this panel is. You can push in on that, and same thing down here. Look at how much that's pushing in. That 18 to 20, this being 20 gauge, the Challenger being 18 gauge, look at the difference between the two of them, and really you could see why you spend extra money with the AMD panel. It's just not on this installation. So even after all this, the panel is just a cheap panel. So I tell you this because we're trying to just educate on this channel. There's more to this channel than just installation and everything else. So there's a lot of misconceptions, and where you think you're saving, this is going to cost you a lot more in the long run. A body man's going to have to spend a lot more time with it, and really someone leans against this car too hard, it has a potential of denting it. So let's get to it, let's grind it. I think all in all, the installation is pretty well. We're gonna grind it flush. We're gonna make it look as good as we can. We're gonna work some body work and try to get these the high spots, basically the low spots, probably up and everything else. So stay tuned and we'll do a final wrap up.
So as far as grinding this quarter skin, what I like to do, I think the belt sander and small surface prep disc with like an 80 grit roll lock on it, I think is the way to go. It just, you want something here. I like the belt sander the most because I really slow it down and I can visually make sure I'm not digging in too deep. If you dig in too deep, you're going to make this metal even thinner and even weaker, and you also don't want something that's going to promote too much heat. So this to me is the best of both worlds, and then like I said, I can just go over it with an 80 grit just real quick on a little 2-inch roll lock surface prep disc. Working my way back, you could see on the quarter panel, that's about when we finished out the welds. You could see the welds there, but really they're very minor. I mean, I guess someone, if they want to spend more time than me, could make these welds almost disappear. Really, as much body work as this quarter panel is going to need, we're not too worried about the welds. A little skim coat's going to go over that. We're going to epoxy and seal it up to make sure it gets in every little crack and crevice. You can see right here, we're also finishing up on the tail panel and just going through the whole car and grinding down all the welds. What's great again about the spot welder is I don't have to go back through and grind any spot welds.
I'm going to wrap up this quarter skin install for the 69 Charger. As you can see, they look good. I got them all kind of flanished out. We spent a lot of time with some hammer dolly work and everything, just really working the edges, and it was extra hard being that the sheet metal was so thin. Still, like I said with the body, man, you're going to have problems doing body work with these panels pushing in and out, you know, as you're blocking. But we did exactly what we were asked to do. We were put in a box, and I think all in all, for the situation that, you know, we were put in, I think the install came out pretty good. I hope the owner got exactly what he's asked for. Everything that I figured would happen has kind of happened, and the job actually came out a little better than I described to him. So all in all, I figure I did all the hour calculation. I told you we do a cost analysis. So basically, these quarter skins took 20 hours extra. That's just these quarter skins than on top of what a normal quarter panel would cost. So that 20 hours came from the inside repairs we showed you earlier. That came from this gas filler top, the repair there, stripping the top of them down to just smooth them out, the repair on the other side, and just fitting the quarter skins, the welding, and the grinding of this area. So that's 20 hours. The math I did right there, the AMD quarter panels, and I'm not sponsored by AMD, I'm not sponsored by Dynacorn, and these Goodmark panels, he said they're 6-7 years old, and who knows, that might be 10 years. The Goodmark, I've used some of their parts and it's worked out okay. These cheap quarter skins, maybe their stampings on it got better, but I really think if we did a full AMD quarter panel with the thicker metal, or got a quarter skin that was 18 gauge and I could metal it, and you know, this thing wasn't pushing in and out, it had less of a chance to warp, I think the job would have been better. But like I said, we had 20 hours in all that. The AMD full quarter panels to my door delivered right now came out to $1,222, I think it was. So if we do the backwards math here, that would be, if my shop rate was $60 an hour, the labor we spent on these quarter skins would have covered the quarter panel job. So really, like I told the owner, he's going to spend the same amount of money. Either in my shop, we're going to do the quarter skins or a full quarter panel. Now, saying that, if you're at home and you want to do quarter skins, knock it out. I think there's a time and a place for quarter skins. For instance, I don't take cars in that aren't completely gutted. I'm not destroying windows. We're not going to weld by them. But if you had the window in the car, if you had interior in this car, and this car wasn't going for a full restoration, then I would say that this might be a candidate for quarter skins. You know, you just, that 20 hours wouldn't matter, because now you don't have to spend 20 hours taking apart the whole interior. So there is a time and place. I've done them on convertibles. I did them actually last car, we've done quarter patches too on cars that they don't make. I did a 58 Impala, and that car, it's a one-off year car, and the quarter panels were rusted all down the whole sides and everything. So we cut that whole thing apart and pretty much ordered everything we can order from the catalog, and we installed them the best we could. We had to make some spots on that car. So all in all, you just got to figure out, you know, what's best for your project. I said it from the start, I don't think that it was right for this job. We did exactly what the owners asked for. I hope he's happy with it, you know, because really it's a hard situation. If he's not, I mean, you could tell someone, hey, this is going to happen, and then when it happens, sometimes it's still your fault. I'm not saying that's going to happen here, but that's why, as a shop, lesson learned here, we kind of took the car on I was emotionally attached to it for the YouTube channel. You know, we do all e-body stuff, and really down the road, we have a lot more e-body stuff. Now, for you Chevy and Ford people, we do have a car for you, but I really wanted to do this car. I thought it would be cool for the channel, so I kind of overlooked a couple red flags there. When the car got here, I didn't want to send it back. I felt bad that, you know, oh, I'll just convince him on this. I think in the future, we just have to stick to our guns and stick to our game plan and, you know, do what I know is best. Like I said, do what you think's best for your home. The whole point of this video is basically to just give you all the tools and knowledge and saying, look, if you're going to do the job like this is what could happen. This is how to do it. And if you have all the knowledge, then you can make an educated decision what best suits you. You know, like I said earlier, for a shop, if a shop has a certain way they do things, there's a reason. You know, I work by the hour, so I try to be really efficient on a lot of this stuff we do. That's why we strip the car all together one time. We cut off all the metal. I do all the grinding one time. It just is more efficient here. If you're at home and you know you just want to do one panel patch at a time, man, do that. That's awesome. You know, that's just, for me, it doesn't work. So that's just how, I think another reason why shops, if you go on TV and stuff, or even YouTube, you don't have a lot of shops posting projects in customers' cars. It's a lot of people building their own projects, because if you're building your own project, you can dictate it, you can do whatever you want. Like I said, there's a couple things on this car I would have done different. We're kind of, like I said, we're put in that box, our hands are tied, and you know, we have to do expectation management with the videos too, with the customer. So we go back and forth. So hang with us. Like I said, I'm trying to do the best I can to kind of put information on the channel, inform, educate, kind of show off what we do a little bit along the time. You know, we've been building these for quite a while, and all in all, I think in general, you know, we can feed off each other, give some information, and then I get a lot of cool constructive feedback that, you know, helps us in the future. So really, thanks for everyone that's been tuning in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing to our channel. Like I said, next thing on this car is going to be, we're going to go ahead and start putting the body panels back on the car. The car is being cut off the frame jig. We're going to put the wheels on it. The owner has plans, I believe, to head to another shop to just finish it off now we've done the hard work. So stay tuned. There'll be at least one more video on this Charger. And thanks for subscribing and liking our videos. We'll see you on the next time. And on the way out, we'll just shoot some primer on this car. I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars.